human beings have long wondered why we become who we are. Is it the legacy of our ancestors, written in the language of DNA, that determines our abilities, personalities, and choices? Or is it the sum of our experiences, family, culture, education, and chance that molds us from infancy onward? The debate between nature and nurture has shaped science, philosophy, and society for centuries. It is a question that reaches into every corner of human development, from intelligence and temperament to health and behavior. Today, the conversation is far from settled. Advances in genetics and neuroscience have revealed astonishing complexities, challenging simple explanations and illuminating the intricate dance between our biology and our environment. To understand ourselves, our similarities, our differences, our potential, we must trace the roots of this enduring question and examine the evidence that continues to reshape our view of what it means to be human. The nature versus nurture debate is one of the oldest and most enduring questions in science, especially in psychology and related fields. At its heart, it asks, what makes us who we are? Are our personalities, behaviors, and abilities shaped by the genetic blueprint we inherit from our parents, or do they arise from the experiences, relationships, and environments that influence us from the moment we are conceived? This seemingly simple question has fascinated philosophers, scientists, and laypeople for centuries, and it continues to shape our thinking about everything from education to mental health, from intelligence to morality. To grasp the foundations of this debate, it is important to clarify what is meant by nature and nurture. In scientific and psychological discussions, nature refers to the biological and genetic factors that influence development, our inherited DNA, brain structure, and the many chemical processes within our bodies. Nurture, by contrast, encompasses all the environmental influences that affect us after conception. This includes the care we receive from our parents, the culture we grow up in, and the sum of our relationships, educational opportunities, and social experiences. In short, nature is what we are born with. Nurture is what happens to us along the way. The origins of the nature versus nurture debate reach back long before the scientific era. Ancient philosophers wrestled with similar questions. Plato, for instance, is often cited as an early proponent of nature, believing that certain aspects of human character are innate, present from birth. Aristotle, on the other hand, emphasized the formative power of experience, a view later echoed by thinkers like John Locke. Locke famously described the human mind as a tabula rasa, or blank slate, suggesting that all knowledge and behavior arise from experience and sensory input. The phrase nature versus nurture itself did not appear until the mid-1800s, when Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, introduced it into scientific discourse. Galton was interested in the inheritance of intelligence and talent, and his work laid the groundwork for much of the later debate. The rise of evolutionary theory, with Darwin's focus on inherited characteristics, provided fertile ground for arguments favoring nature. Meanwhile, the development of psychology and anthropology brought new attention to the roles of learning, culture, and environment. As the debate expanded, it sometimes took on a life of its own, reaching beyond academic circles. At various times in history, ideas about nature and nurture have been misused to justify discriminatory ideologies or social policies. For example, arguments emphasizing genetic determinism have been used to support notions of inherent superiority or inferiority among groups, while extreme environmentalist positions have fueled beliefs that social engineering can completely reshape individuals or societies. These misapplications highlight the need for careful, balanced inquiry into the true contributions of both genetics and environment. In the 20th century, the debate found new expression in psychology. Theories about human development, learning, and behavior often position themselves along a spectrum from nature to nurture. Behaviorism, championed by figures like B.F. Skinner, argued that all behavior could be explained by environmental conditioning, that nurture was everything. In contrast, theorists such as Noam Chomsky introduced the idea of universal grammar, suggesting that humans are born with an innate capacity for language, pointing to the power of nature. These foundational studies set the stage for decades of research, debate, and evolving consensus. One of the most influential tools for exploring the nature-nurture question has been the study of twins. Identical twins, who share nearly all their genes, provide a unique natural experiment. By comparing identical twins raised together with those raised apart, researchers have tried to tease apart the relative contributions of genetics and environment to various traits. Early twin studies revealed significant genetic influences on everything from intelligence to temperament, but they also found strong environmental effects. Over time, these studies established that both nature and nurture play important roles, and that their interaction is often more significant than either factor alone. The language of opposition nature versus nurture can be misleading. Increasingly, scientists recognize that it is not a matter of one or the other. Instead, it is the interplay between genetics and environment that shapes who we become. For example, while genetic factors may influence a person's potential for musical ability, realizing that potential often depends on environmental factors such as exposure to music, family support, and access to instruments or lessons. In education, a student might inherit a predisposition for reading, but their actual reading ability may depend on the availability of books and the encouragement they receive at home or in school. This recognition of interactionism, the idea that genetic and environmental factors work together, often in complex feedback loops, has become the prevailing view in modern psychology and the biological sciences. Developmental science, in particular, has moved beyond the simple dichotomy of nature and nurture, seeing it as biologically implausible. Researchers now focus on developmental processes, examining how genes and environments interact over time to produce the full tapestry of human behavior and ability. Consider the development of intelligence. Early debates often tried to quantify how much of intelligence was hereditary and how much was learned. Today, the consensus is that intelligence emerges from the continuous interplay of genes and environment. Hereditary factors may set certain potentials or tendencies, but environmental influences, nutrition, education, social interactions can profoundly shape how those potentials are realized. The same holds true for personality traits, mental health, and many other characteristics. While some aspects of personality appear relatively stable and have a genetic component, life experiences, relationships, and cultural context can all have significant, lasting effects. Cultural and socioeconomic factors are especially important to consider. The environments in which people grow up, from the resources available in their communities to the norms and expectations of their societies, can have lasting impacts on development. These influences are not simply additive, they interact with genetic predispositions in dynamic ways. For example, a child with a genetic tendency toward anxiety may be more affected by stressful environments than a child without that predisposition. Conversely, supportive relationships and stable surroundings can help mitigate genetic vulnerabilities, highlighting the profound power of nurture to shape outcomes. Language acquisition offers a vivid example of the nature-nurture interplay. Noam Chomsky's theory of universal grammar posited that humans are born with an innate ability to acquire language, suggesting a strong role for nature. Yet, the specific language a child learns, their accent, and their proficiency all depend on the environment, on the languages spoken around them, the richness of their linguistic interactions, and the opportunities they have to practice and engage. The interactionist perspective helps explain why children everywhere acquire language so rapidly, but also why the details of that language differ so widely across cultures and communities. The debate's relevance extends far beyond the laboratory or lecture hall. In education, for example, understanding the contributions of nature and nurture shapes how teachers approach instruction and support. Recognizing that students arrive with a mix of inherited talents and environmental experiences helps educators provide the right balance of challenge and support. In mental health, the interplay of genetic vulnerability and life experiences guides how practitioners understand, diagnose, and treat conditions such as depression, anxiety, or schizophrenia. It is also important to acknowledge the limitations of current knowledge. While research has illuminated many aspects of the nature-nurture relationship, significant gaps remain. Some traits are easier to study than others, and the precise mechanisms by which genes and environments interact are still being investigated. Most experts now agree that seeking a definitive answer to which is more important, nature or nurture, is less productive than striving to understand how they work together to shape the complexity of human life. The history of the nature versus nurture debate, from its philosophical beginnings through its scientific evolution, highlights both the fascination and the difficulty of disentangling the roots of human behavior and development. The dichotomy itself, while useful for framing questions and guiding research, is ultimately too simplistic to capture the richness of human life. As modern science has shown, our genes and our environments are inextricably intertwined, each shaping and responding to the other throughout our lives. In summary, nature refers to the biological and genetic endowment we inherit, while nurture encompasses the environmental influences that act upon us from conception onward. The debate between these two forces is long-standing, with deep roots in philosophy, psychology, and biology. Yet, the most compelling evidence points not to a battle between nature and nurture, but to a dance, a dynamic interplay in which genes and environments continually shape, influence, and respond to one another. Understanding this complexity is essential, not only for scientists and educators, but for anyone seeking to answer the profound question of what makes us who we are. Imagine two children. One growing up in a bustling city apartment, the other in a quiet rural farmhouse. Both are bright-eyed, curious, and full of potential. If you were to follow their lives from infancy through adolescence, what would shape their intellect, temperament, habits, and quirks? Is it the pattern of genes inherited from their parents, or the tapestry of experiences unfolding around them? Science, as it turns out, has spent decades searching for the answer, moving far beyond old arguments into the nuanced, data-rich landscape of the 21st century. To truly understand how genes and environment shape us, scientists have turned to some of nature's most revealing experiments: twins. Identical twins born from the same fertilized egg share virtually all their DNA. Fraternal twins, like ordinary siblings, share about half. By observing how twins develop, sometimes raised together, sometimes apart, researchers can tease apart the threads of genetic influence from those of environment. Over the past several decades, these studies have become more sophisticated, evolving from simple observation to high-resolution brain scans and vast genomic analyses. One striking insight comes from imaging studies that peer into the developing brain. When researchers mapped the cerebral cortex of children and adolescents, using sets of twins as their subjects, they found a fascinating pattern. Certain regions of the brain, those involved in sensory processing and motor skills, showed a stronger genetic influence. In contrast, other areas, such as those linked to higher-order thinking and reasoning, appeared more sensitive to environmental factors. This anatomical evidence underscores a recurring theme. Genes and environment are not competing for dominance over the whole person, but rather, their influence waxes and wanes across different domains of development. Looking beyond the brain to the broader landscape of human traits, a vast meta-analysis of twin data paints an even more balanced picture. When scientists aggregated data from thousands of pairs of twins, they found that, on average, heritability and environmental influence nearly split the difference. About 49% of the variation in traits could be attributed to genetics, while 51% was traced to environmental factors. This rough parity challenges the notion that one force is inherently primary. Instead, it points to a kind of developmental dance, in which genes and environments move in close step, sometimes leading, sometimes following. Yet the numbers alone do not capture the full complexity. Consider scientific achievement in children. In one large twin study, over 60% of the variance in scientific achievement was linked to genetic factors. This suggests that certain cognitive abilities, such as analytical thinking or curiosity, may be more deeply rooted in genetic makeup. However, the remaining variance, nearly 40%, was explained by environmental influences. Intriguingly, these environmental effects were not primarily shared experiences like classroom instruction or family routines, but rather individual experiences unique to each child. This highlights the subtlety of environmental impact. Even siblings raised under the same roof can encounter life in profoundly different ways, which in turn shapes their development. Adoption studies provide another powerful lens through which to examine the interplay of genes and environment. By following children who are genetically unrelated to their adoptive parents, researchers can watch nature and nurture unfold in real time. Classic studies, such as the Minnesota study of twins reared apart and the Colorado Adoption Project, have shown that both inheritance and environment make significant contributions to an adoptee's development. Intelligence, for example, tends to correlate more strongly with biological parents, reflecting a genetic influence. But traits like language use, manners, and even some behavioral disorders show the unmistakable imprint of the adoptive home. The Romanian adoption study offers a poignant illustration of this dynamic. Children raised in severely deprived institutional environments often displayed developmental delays regardless of genetic background. Yet when adopted into nurturing families, many showed remarkable catch-up growth evidence that environmental change could unlock or suppress genetic potential. These findings reinforce a core insight: genes may set the stage, but the environment directs the performance. As scientists have probed deeper, a new frontier has emerged, one that blurs the old boundaries between nature and nurture. This is the realm of gene-environment interaction, where the effect of a gene depends on the environment, and vice versa. A striking example comes from studies of environmental sensitivity in identical twins. By analyzing genetic variants across thousands of individuals, researchers have begun to identify specific genes that make some people more responsive to their surroundings. These so-called sensitivity genes do not act as simple switches. Rather, they shape how intensely a person reacts to parenting styles, social stress, or even educational interventions. The implications for mental health and neurodevelopment are profound. Large-scale genetic studies have revealed that the same genetic variants linked to environmental sensitivity are also associated with psychiatric and neurodevelopmental traits. This means that a child's risk for conditions like anxiety or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, may depend not only on their genetic endowment, but also on the specific environments they encounter, and how their genes modulate their response to those environments. But the story does not end there. Recent research points to a remarkable phenomenon. Children's genetics can actually influence the kind of parenting they receive. For instance, a child with a genetic tendency toward impulsivity or emotional sensitivity may evoke particular responses from their caregivers, such as stricter discipline or extra reassurance. In turn, these parenting strategies further shape the child's development, creating a feedback loop where nature channels nurture, and nurture loops back to sculpt nature's expression. This concept, sometimes called nature via nurture, has been observed in studies of adopted children and their parents. Researchers have shown that a child's genetic makeup can affect not just how they respond to parenting, but also how parents adapt their behaviors to the child's needs. The Early Growth and Development study found that genetic factors influence children's reactions to their adoptive parents, which in turn altered the trajectory of the parent-child relationship. These findings suggest that interventions aimed at improving parenting or child outcomes must consider this dynamic interplay. A one-size-fits-all approach may miss the mark if it ignores the child's underlying genetic sensitivities. Beneath all these discoveries lies an even deeper layer of complexity: the science of epigenetics. For much of the 20th century, genes were seen as fixed blueprints, passed from parent to child with little alteration. But advances in molecular biology have upended this view. Scientists now know that environmental influences, nutrition, stress, toxins, even social experiences can leave chemical marks on DNA, known as epigenetic modifications. These marks do not change the genetic code itself, but they do affect how genes are read and expressed. Early life proves to be a particularly sensitive period. Environmental exposures during childhood can be recorded in the genome through epigenetic changes, shaping not only immediate health and development, but also long-term outcomes. For example, inadequate nutrition in early childhood can modify the expression of genes involved in growth and metabolism, increasing the risk for chronic diseases later in life. Similarly, exposure to chronic stress can alter gene regulation in the brain, influencing emotional resilience and vulnerability to mental illness. The implications of epigenetics extend even further. Some epigenetic modifications can be passed from one generation to the next, meaning that the effects of a parent's experiences may ripple down to their children and grandchildren. This transgenerational inheritance has been documented in both animal models and, to a limited but growing extent, in humans. It suggests that the line between nature and nurture is not only blurred in one lifetime, but may be braided together across generations. Technological advances have fueled this revolution. New tools allow scientists to map patterns of epigenetic modification with extraordinary precision, revealing how social and environmental factors are inscribed into the genome. This has opened new horizons in understanding the origins of disease, the persistence of behavioral traits, and the mechanisms by which experiences good and bad become biologically embedded. The conversation between genes and environment is not a monologue, but a dialogue. Social experiences, for instance, can alter the way genes are expressed in the brain, affecting everything from learning to social behavior. Genetic variation, in turn, can influence how individuals respond to the same social environment. In animal studies, researchers have shown that inheritance, prenatal environment, and postnatal care all leave their mark on physiological traits. This complexity is echoed in humans, where gene-environment interactions can help explain why identical twins are never truly identical in every way, and why siblings raised together can diverge so dramatically. Examples of gene-environment interaction abound in medical research as well. Certain genetic variants, such as those affecting the NAT2 enzyme, only increase disease risk like bladder cancer when paired with specific environmental exposures, such as cigarette smoking. It is the combination, not the individual factor, that determines the outcome. In psychiatry, similar patterns emerge. Genetic predispositions may only manifest as disorders in the presence of particular life experiences. To untangle these webs, scientists have developed ingenious study designs. Adoption and family studies, especially those comparing siblings or parent-offspring pairs, can help distinguish passive genetic influences from those arising through family relationships. By layering genomic data atop these traditional methods, researchers are now able to clarify the causal processes that shape development. This marriage of classic and cutting-edge approaches is gradually illuminating the pathways by which genes and environments converge to mold the human mind and body. Still, the science is far from settled. Many questions remain about the precise mechanisms by which environmental factors talk to the genome, the durability of epigenetic changes, and the ways in which interventions can tip the scales toward healthier outcomes. But one lesson is clear. The old debate between nature and nurture has been overtaken by a richer, more intricate understanding. The forces that shape who we are do not compete for primacy. They collaborate, intertwine, and sometimes even conspire across time and generations. In the end, our lives are written in both the language of DNA and the script of experience. Genes provide the notes, environments conduct the symphony, and each life becomes a unique performance, never to be repeated, never fully predictable, and always shaped by the subtle harmonies of nature and nurture in concert. For centuries, the nature versus nurture debate has captivated scientists, philosophers, and the broader public alike. Yet, as we move deeper into the 21st century, it becomes clear that this old dichotomy has outlived its usefulness. The boundary between genes and environment is no longer rigid. Instead, contemporary science reveals a landscape shaped by their constant interplay. Rather than acting as opposing forces, nature and nurture are now seen as co-authors of the human story, each influencing, modifying, and amplifying the other in a dynamic dance. This new perspective not only transforms our understanding of human development, but also carries profound implications for real-world decisions in education, mental health, and public policy. Modern research has rewritten the old script in remarkable ways. One of the most striking developments comes from the burgeoning field of behavioral epigenetics, where scientists study how life experiences can leave chemical marks on our genetic material. These marks do not change the underlying DNA sequence, but they do alter how genes are read and expressed. What is especially compelling is the evidence that this process is bidirectional. Parenting and caregiving influence a child's gene expression, but a child's characteristics in turn shape the caregiving they receive. This feedback loop underscores that development is not a one-way street. Instead, it is a constantly evolving relationship between our genes and the world around us. The implications for child development are profound. Interventions that enrich environments, support caregivers, and tune into each child's unique needs can have lasting effects, not just by providing better experiences, but by directly influencing the biological pathways that guide growth and learning. The significance of gene-environment interaction extends far beyond early childhood. Throughout the lifespan, individual differences emerge from the ongoing interplay of genetic variation and environmental exposures. Recent advances in statistical analysis and artificial intelligence have enabled scientists to map these interactions with increasing precision. By analyzing vast datasets, researchers can now tease apart the contributions of genetics and environment to a range of human outcomes, from academic achievement to susceptibility to mental illness. What they find time and again is that genes do not operate in a vacuum. Specific genetic variants can make individuals more sensitive to particular environmental exposures, amplifying the effects of stress, trauma, or opportunity. Conversely, supportive environments can buffer genetic vulnerabilities, altering the trajectory of risk and resilience. This interplay is especially evident in the field of mental health. Decades of research have shown that mental disorders rarely arise from genetics or environment alone. Instead, they result from a complex mix of biological, psychological, and social factors. For example, a person might inherit a genetic predisposition to depression, but whether that vulnerability manifests depends on a host of other influences, life experiences, relationships, access to care, and even chance events. This realization has shifted the focus of mental health research and practice. Rather than searching for a single cause of conditions like anxiety or schizophrenia, professionals increasingly look for patterns of risk and resilience shaped by the interplay of genes and environment. This approach has led to a greater appreciation for neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and reorganize in response to experience. It also supports a more individualized approach to treatment, where interventions are tailored to a person's unique genetic background, life history, and current circumstances. The story deepens when we consider the role of the environment in shaping well-being. Research has shown that access to nature, whether green parks or blue bodies of water, can have a measurable impact on mental health. These findings remind us that nurture extends far beyond family and school to include the broader ecological context in which we live. Exposure to natural environments can lower stress, improve mood, and even enhance cognitive functioning. Such evidence has practical implications for urban planning and public health policy. By investing in accessible green spaces, communities may be able to promote resilience and reduce disparities in mental health outcomes. Education, too, has been transformed by this integrated understanding. Scholars reviewing the latest findings emphasize that both genetic and environmental factors contribute to differences in learning and achievement. But the key insight is not simply that both matter, it is how they work together that makes the difference. For instance, Research shows that children's genetic sensitivities can shape how they respond to different teaching strategies, classroom climates, and educational resources. Some students may thrive under a particular instructional style, while others benefit from a different approach, depending in part on their genetic makeup. This recognition has inspired calls for more personalized education, where teachers and policymakers move away from one-size-fits-all solutions. The goal is to create flexible learning environments that can respond to the diverse needs, backgrounds, and potentials of every student. This nuanced view also shapes how society approaches group disparities and the pursuit of equity. In the past, simplistic interpretations of either genetic determinism or environmental causation sometimes fueled divisive policies, whether to justify the status quo or to advocate for sweeping interventions. Today's science paints a more complex picture. Programs like Head Start, for example, were originally based on the idea that enriched environments could offset disadvantage. While such interventions do make a difference, their effects are not uniform. Outcomes vary depending on each child's genetic sensitivities, family circumstances, and broader social context. Policymakers are therefore encouraged to design flexible, layered interventions that combine early education, parental support, healthcare, and community resources. The aim is not just to level the playing field, but to recognize and nurture the full spectrum of human potential. Technological advances are accelerating this shift. The rapid growth of epigenetic research, for instance, holds promise for the future of healthcare and therapeutics. As we learn more about how environmental exposures, from diet to pollution to social stress, affect gene expression, new avenues open up for prevention and treatment. Personalized medicine, which tailors interventions to an individual's genetic and epigenetic profile, is already making headway in fields like oncology and psychiatry. In public health, insights from gene-environment studies are informing strategies to reduce the burden of chronic disease and mental illness. By identifying individuals who are most susceptible to certain risks, interventions can be targeted more effectively, maximizing benefits and minimizing harm. At the same time, philosophical perspectives are evolving to keep pace with the science. Epigenetics, with its demonstration of gene malleability, challenges the long-standing view of the genome as fixed destiny. Instead, the genome is now seen as a responsive system, open to influence from a wide array of environmental factors. This has important implications for how we think about responsibility, agency, and the potential for change. If genes are not immutable scripts but flexible instructions shaped by lived experience, then interventions at both the individual and societal level take on greater urgency and promise. Recent studies also highlight the importance of appreciating the uniqueness of individual life stories. No two people, even those with similar genetic backgrounds, are shaped in exactly the same way. Life experiences, chance events, and even random biological variation all contribute to the tapestry of personality, talent, and vulnerability. This realization pushes back against both genetic essentialism and environmental determinism. Instead, it invites us to embrace complexity and to honor the diversity of ways in which people grow, learn, and thrive. The implications for emotion and effective science are equally profound. Researchers now propose that emotions do not arise solely from innate circuits or learned responses, but from the intricate interactions among genetic, bodily, and environmental influences. The emergence of emotion is thus a dynamic process, unfolding as individuals encounter new situations, interpret them through the lens of past experience, and adapt to changing circumstances. This perspective opens new pathways for understanding emotional disorders and for designing interventions that address both biological and contextual factors. As the field continues to advance, innovations in statistical modeling and artificial intelligence are making it possible to unravel even more of this complexity. These tools help scientists identify patterns that were previously hidden, revealing subtle ways in which genes and environment conspire to shape health, behavior, and achievement. In public health, such insights are being used to design more effective policies, from early childhood intervention to mental health support and beyond. In summary, the nature versus nurture debate, once framed as a contest between competing forces, has given way to a richer, more integrative understanding. Genes and environment are not separate threads but interwoven strands, shaping the trajectory of development at every stage of life. This realization challenges us to move beyond binary thinking and to embrace the full complexity of human potential. It reminds us that interventions matter not because they can erase genetic differences, but because they can help every individual realize their own unique possibilities. Whether in the classroom, the clinic, or the community, the challenge and the promise lie in recognizing the dynamic interplay of nature and nurture, and in leveraging that knowledge to build a more just, resilient, and flourishing society.